page 110 in your book. Are we going?
Yep.
Good morning, girls. We did the table yesterday, so that should be complete. We're on page 108. And I need my glasses.
We got to see
what was it about the signs that caused the multitudes to follow Jesus?
Jesus doing miracles which caught their interest.
Okay, they were interested, they were curious maybe. What else? Grace?
The works had never been done before.
Yeah, the works had never been, they were seeing stuff they'd never seen before. It was amazing. So they were shocked by that, and they probably wanted to see more. Yes?
Jesus would do it to all people, not just like the wealthy people.
Right, Jesus was interested in everyone. Jesus was interested especially in those that other people weren't paying attention to. And so that might have piqued their interest. I think some people really believed in him. I think some people just wanted to see what he was going to do next. See what spectacular thing he would do next. Were Jesus' reasons for performing miracles the same as the people's reasons for following him? No, absolutely not. And explain that then.
Explain. Yes.
Because Jesus did it to test their faith and show power.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus said what he said to Philip and Andrew to test their faith, but Jesus did miracles to not only to heal people and to help people, but to reveal who he was. And the people, they just, wanted to see more miracles, or they wanted to make him king or whatever, but none of that was Jesus' plan. Jesus' plan was to draw people to himself that they might be saved, not to wow people, not to make people want more miracles. When Jesus tested Philip, what do you think he was looking for Philip to demonstrate or say? So Jesus says, how are we going to get food for these people? What do you think he was trying to do? He knew what he was going to do. He wasn't actually worried about how the food would be provided. He knew. So what was he trying to get Philip to demonstrate? Grace?
His reliance and trust in Jesus that he could provide.
Yeah, his reliance and trust in Jesus, his faith that Christ could provide. He was giving him an opportunity to grow his faith in God, or in Jesus. What would have been the best thing for Philip to say? How are we going to feed all these people? What should Philip have said?
Trusted Jesus.
Yeah, but how would he say that? What would he say? How are you going to feed all these people? However you want to, Lord. Do whatever you want to do. He would have had faith that Christ had the situation well at hand. What did Philip's answer show about how he expected the problem to be solved?
He didn't expect Jesus to do something supernatural.
He was expecting them to find food somewhere, go buy food or whatever, but not for Jesus to do a miracle. When Peter tells Jesus, it wasn't Peter, I think it was Peter or Andrew, I don't know, tells Jesus about the boy with the lunch, is he showing faith or discouragement? We can't know for sure, but he says words to the effect of, here's a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what is this to feed so many? So, is he showing faith or is he showing discouragement in that? I would lean more toward discouragement than faith, because he's saying we can't feed all these people with a few loaves of fish. Yeah.
Were the fish like cooked or was it just raw? What? Was the fish cooked?
It was edible, whatever it was. It was ready to be eaten. It might have been salted and dried. There's a staple of the Zambian diet that's called kapenta, and it's little fish, and they're like dried fish, little sardines that are dried. So I don't know how they dry them, but they're not cooked in a traditional way. And sushi is raw fish. I'll eat that all the time. So it was ready to eat. Let's put it that way. What does Jesus' ability to provide food imply about his provision for believers today? Caitlin?
He has provided for us no matter the circumstance.
Exactly. He can and will provide for us no matter the circumstance. Since all the events of the world are moving toward Christ ruling as King of the universe, why did he not let the people crown him king when they wanted to?
Wasn't his purpose on earth to become king?
Yet, right? Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't time for that. He knew it wasn't time. It wasn't what God had willed for him. He needed to die and rise, and then, die for our sins and rise again, and then later at some point set up his kingdom. If you were part of the crowd, what would you have thought when Jesus left? I might have thought, what's wrong with him? He doesn't want to be king. He wouldn't want to be king. I want to be king. Why doesn't he want to be king? I think they would have been very, some might have been angry, but I think some would have been confused. What do you think was Jesus' reason for leaving? Why did he leave?
Because they were like overwhelming him.
They what?
Or overwhelming him.
Maybe they were overwhelming him. I mean, he didn't want them to grab him and take him. And so he got out of there. So that's at least part of it. The Bible tells us that Jesus was fully human and that he was tempted in every way we are, except for without sin. And maybe he wanted to make sure he wasn't tempted to give in. Maybe he wanted to leave the situation to prevent the temptation of wanting to become king. I don't think I know he would never give in to that temptation, but that may have had a little something to do with it. Okay, if you would now turn to the teacher lesson. And we'll start this. I was hoping we'd finish it today, but I don't think we're going to finish it today. Certainly we'll finish it tomorrow. And this is, we're talking about 2 miracles in Galilee, and this is from John 6. I need to tell you that for whatever reason, my computer is not allowing, the PowerPoint at least is not allowing me to get on OneDrive. OneDrive said it was processing changes or something. And so I don't have the PowerPoint that I amended and changed so that the verses were up there, so that the timelines that I don't want to go through aren't. And so this is from the original disc, and I'm hopeful that my PowerPoint will begin working again soon, especially since I'm going to continue to lecture in 9th grade as well. So this is John 6, and in John 6, John records 2 famous miracles. The first is the feeding of the 5,000, and then walking on water. When we were in John 5, it was around around the time of the Passover. And then at the beginning of John 6, it opens up by saying after this, which remembers some undetermined amount of time had elapsed. So what was Christ doing during that time? Well, we talked about it. He was in Galilee. And we talked about that yesterday, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I'm certainly not going to spend time on this. But he traveled around Galilee. He healed a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath. He taught great crowds. He chose his disciples. He went to the sea. He preached the Sermon on the Mount. Then he traveled south to Nain. He raised, in Capernaum he healed the centurion's son, but he traveled south to Nain and raised the widow of a woman in Nain. So it says that this was a widow and this was her only son. Why do you think a lot of people died while Jesus was living? Why do you think Jesus chose to raise this woman's son? In ancient Israel, women had no way of taking care of themselves, providing for themselves. And so from birth until the time they married, they were cared for, they were provided for by their father. Once they were married, they were provided for by their husband. When their husband died, they were provided for by their sons. They didn't have a way, a legitimate way, a good way to make a living for themselves. So here this woman is a widow. Her husband has died, and presumably her father as well. Her son has died. There is no one to care for her. So Jesus restores to her her son, not only out of mercy for him, but definitely out of mercy for her. And so that's why he chose to do that. And then, by the way, this is all from the Synoptic Gospels, not from, this is what we went over on the chart. Then he goes back to Capernaum again, where he eats with a Pharisee named Simon, and a sinful woman comes in and is so taken by him that she weeps and uses her tears to wipe his feet. He goes on another tour of Galilee, and his mother and brothers come to him and say, "Come home, you're crazy." And he's like, "Nope, these are my mothers and brothers and sisters. I'm going to do what God called for me to do." And then he crossed the Sea of Galilee. He went to the area of the Gerasenes, and he healed the demoniac, and then he crossed back over the Sea of Galilee. Then he goes to Nazareth, and he's rejected, and he can't do a lot of miracles. And then he goes on a tour of Galilee again, and then he rests. Now, this, by the way, is the Sea of Galilee, and it's a grassy area on the western side of the sea. Some people think this might be the area where the feeding of the 5,000 took place. We can't know that for sure, but that's what some people think. So we're going to talk about the feeding of the 5,000. Did I skip the part about that? Yes, I did. Okay. Interesting. We have the feeding of the 5,000, and this is an important miracle, and so let's talk about the importance of the miracle. First of all, this is the only miracle of Jesus that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. Now, the resurrection is as well, but his miracles among the people. That's recorded in all 4 Gospels. So it's important for that reason alone, but it's also important for a couple of other reasons. First of all, it was performed in front of many people. It says there were 5,000 men, which means with women and children it may have been 12,000 or more. It was performed, it was in the presence of many people. And then secondly, it was a miracle of creation. What do I mean by a miracle of creation?
He created more
food.
Yeah, he created more food. He made food be there that wasn't there. Next year in Junior Bible, we'll talk about the creation of the universe out of nothing is the greatest miracle ever. Why? Because there was nothing. It's not just that God healed something that was already there or changed something that was already there. He created the universe out of nothing. And so a miracle of creation is always, an amazing miracle. All miracles are, even more so. And then finally, it's a picture of Christ. This is foreshadowing what Jesus is about to say at Passover, that he is the bread of life. Or say at Capernaum, excuse me. That he is the bread of life. He is the bread broken for us. So let's talk about the occasion of the miracle. So this took place during a time of rest, and this is going to give you 3 applications from Christ's vacation. I'm just going to do this quickly because I don't think this is the point of the whole thing, and I'm not sure Christ took vacations. So it's not like he, it's like wearing Mickey ears or something. I don't know. What are you going to do? I'm going to go to Disney World. No, that's not it. So it was during a time of rest that this took place, and he continued to do his work for the Lord. And so here are the lessons. There's nothing wrong with Christian workers taking a rest. Now, if that's all you do is rest, there is something wrong with that. But there's nothing wrong with time away. I really, when I got back from basketball last night, at what time was it? 9:30ish. I really needed to stay here and get some work done. But I decided, you know what? I really need to go home and rest. And so that's what I did. Now I'm behind today because of it.
Same.
But it was long to take a rest. And then
No cap.
even while resting from earthly pressure, remaining ready to serve the Lord, the people showed up. He took it on and decided to bless them. So be ready to serve the Lord. And then be willing to have your vacation end sooner than planned. In other words, he was planning to rest for a while longer, and the people showed up, and it ended. Oh, yes, and also don't forget Jesus is manly. And so the miracle took place near the time of Passover. We see, obviously, part of this is that John's gospel centers on Passover and on Jerusalem. So he always goes back to that and to the next Passover. But it does remind us that Jesus is the Lamb of God who would take away the sin of the world. And that's always in the forefront of John's life. Okay, so let's talk about the failure of Philip and Andrew to understand what was going on. Now, we can't be too hard on him. I mean, we can, but we shouldn't be, because we mess up too. I forgot to read the passage, by the way. So I'm going to read John 6, 1 through 9, that first part. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. That's what it was called in John's day. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover feast of the Jews was at hand. It was near. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so these people may eat? He said this to test Philip, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? So we have both Philip and Andrew who are not understanding what Jesus is about to do. And honestly, that is a good representation for us. That sometimes we don't understand what God is up to, and we question it. And so Jesus says, where are we going to find food? Why? Why would he do that when he knew where they were going to find food? To grow Andrew's faith, or to grow Philip's faith. And Philip is probably thinking, this is impossible. it's not. Jesus, the Lamb of God, can do this. Every trial we face has a purpose, whether we know it or not, whether we ever realize it or not. And part of that purpose is usually that our faith, our relationship with Jesus might grow. God is always trying to grow us in our faith. But the disciples were, as we often do, looking at outside circumstances rather than the power of God over those circumstances. So trials test our faith. Failure is looking at outward circumstances rather than God's power over circumstances. Their response wasn't grounded in a proper understanding of who Jesus is. That is true for us sometime as well. We often do the same thing, trying to solve our problems instead of taking them to God. And when we do that, we are living as virtual atheists. We are living as though God does not exist, when we try to solve everything ourselves and not allow God to help us. Pardon me if I've told you both of these stories before, but when Josh was far from God, I remember praying this. I remember praying, God, I know that you can draw him back to yourself. I just don't see how. And after Josh got back from Zambia and had returned to his faith, I remember repenting before God and saying, God, I'm sorry. I just couldn't see. And God said, that's because you couldn't conceive of an orphan boy named Gift. But I could. And we need to trust him. We need to trust him. I don't know what I've told you about Katie's birth. I know I've told you about Josh's. But Josh was born by a C-section. He had to be. The birth, I never tell the whole story to someone who hasn't had a baby. I'm afraid she won't want to, but let's just put it this way. Without modern medicine, we'd both be dead. And then we have Katie, and the doctor said, it's going to have to be a C-section again. And so we had to schedule a C-section. I'm at the doctor's office, and I ask for the C-section to be on Friday, September 15th. And here's why. On August 10th, excuse me. On August 9th of 1995, my brother-in-law died very unexpectedly of a heart attack at the age of 45. This was the second of my in-laws' 3 children to die in adulthood. My sister-in-law very tragically took her own life at 28, and I never knew anything of her. And so now my in-laws had lost both of their 2 of their 3 children, and my husband had lost both of his siblings. My mother-in-law in particular has been through more heartache, not just that, more heartache than I could ever imagine. Her mother died when she was 2. She never knew her mother. Her father really wasn't interested in raising 5 children. He kept the 2 oldest and farmed the other 3 out to families that were willing to take them. So my mother-in-law was raised by people to whom she was not related. She was essentially a foster child. And so this was devastating. Jeff and his father and his brother owned a bookstore, Keezer's Bookstore, in downtown Omaha. And once Rick was gone, then both Jeff and his father had to be at the store every day. Now on Saturdays, because at that time, downtown was pretty dead. It's not like it is now. I wish we had a bookstore down there now. So only one of them would work. So Grandpa could get through, Grandma would go down with him to the bookstore, could get through on Friday on his own. And if the baby was born on Friday, and then Grandpa could take the store alone on Saturday, and then Sunday the bookstore was closed, then I would get 3 days with Jeff there after the baby was born. And I thought that's about as good as once Rick died, I wasn't sure that Jeff could be there at all for Katie's birth. We didn't know it was Katie, but and so I asked for Friday, September 15th. And the doctor said, well, I'm scheduled for a surgery that morning, but I will change that and do the C-section instead, because I gave him my whole sob story. And he went out and came back in and he said, I'm so sorry, but there's not an operating room available. I can't do it on Friday. We'll schedule it for Monday, the 18th. And I'm on my way home from that appointment and I'm angry at God. And my prayer went something like this. Lord, you created the universe in 6 days. No, I think this wouldn't have been a big deal. Find me an operating room. You could have found me an operating room. And I felt the Spirit of God saying, Amy, just wait. And even then I thought, I wonder what God's doing. And so in the middle of the night, and it was probably actually at this point, Saturday the 16th of September, I woke up and went, whoa, what was that? And so I got up and I did what women do when they're close to giving birth. I did ironing that needed to be done. I wrote a recommendation for our pastor's son because I was pretty sure I was going to the hospital that day to have a baby. And finally I realized I needed to wake up Jeff. We called the doctor. The doctor said, you need to get to the hospital. We get to the hospital and I'm already in labor, quite much in labor. And so the doctor says, you want to give it a shot as long as you're in labor? Because you see, with Josh, I didn't have the typical experience. I was hooked up to all kinds of monitors and medication and all kinds of stuff to keep me alive, and so I didn't have the kind of experience that they show in the movie that they show you. This perfect little experience that they show you when you're in your birthing classes. You're walking up and down the hallways. Your husband's rubbing your back. He's feeding you ice chips. It's just beautiful. And I'd never had that, so I thought, yeah, let's give it a shot. Now, on the way to the hospital, I said to Jeff, the sweetest thing God could do for your mother right now is to give her a little girl on her birthday. September 16th is my mother-in-law's birthday, and she wanted a little girl. She'd had a granddaughter, the oldest grandchild's granddaughter. Then she had this spate of boys who were all active and noisy and crazy. In fact, it was hilarious to me when my two nephews, who are quite a bit older, took Josh to the zoo together and came back and said, he's a handful. And I said, do you know what you were like when you were that age? Because I remember you at that age. She'd had all these noisy, rambunctious boys, and she wanted a girl. And so I said, the sweetest thing God could do for your mother right now is give her a little girl on her birthday. And so I get to the hospital, and it is Saturday, September 16th, 1995. You can look it up on your phones, not right now, but on Saturday, September 16th, 1995, the University of Nebraska Cornhuskers kicked Arizona State's tail in a football game, and we found the perfect way for me to labor listening to a Husker football game. I didn't feel anything. I was like, yeah, we're winning the whole time. We won a lot at that time. 1995. Scott Frost might have been the quarterback that year. Anyway, that doesn't matter. So Katie is born, and it does end up having to be a C-section. Katie's born. So when you have a C-section, you have a sheet in front of you, partially to keep any bacteria out of the field, but also because you don't want to see that. So Katie is born, and the doctor says it's a girl. And I said, no, really, it's a girl. I can't believe it's a girl. No, it can't be a girl. Is it really a girl? And Jeff and I are crying, and we're praising God, and we can't believe it's a girl, and isn't this wonderful? And so the doctor takes Katie, brings her around to me, and holds her up so I can see her. He says, Amy, we don't know everything, but we do know that this is a girl. And so God gave my mother-in-law her girl on her birthday, and my mother-in-law is now 96. And this September, or next September, when she celebrates her 97th birthday, which I'm sure she will, because the woman's amazing. She fell recently and broke her shoulder. She is growing new bone. And the doctor went, this shouldn't be happening because 96-year-old people die. I have 25-year-olds that haven't grown bone as quickly as your mother-in-law has grown bone. So she's just amazing. She just keeps on ticking. She's a strong, strong woman. But God blessed my mother-in-law in this time of great trial with this little girl on her birthday, best birthday present she ever got. We never know what God is up to when we think he's not paying attention. But he is. He's paying attention. And he knows what you're going through. And he will provide for you in it. So let's talk about the miracle a little bit. This miracle reveals Christ's sovereignty, reveals that he is God. These were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. This reveals that Christ is Messiah, that he is God. And we see this, first of all, in his omniscience. We see, no, that's interesting. Okay. We see it in his omniscience. He knew what he was going to do. It tells us that in the passage. He wasn't worried. He wasn't really, where are we going to get food? No, he knew. And so he knew what it was that he was going to do. And he was trying to help his disciples grow in their faith in that. He was in total control of this. But it does require, I might say involve, instead of require, our obedience, man's obedience. Here's what verse 10 says. Verse 10 says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. So the disciples obeyed. They had the people sit down. They organized the people. They got them sitting down. They were just thinking, we have no food. We can't feed these people. But God had spoken. Jesus said, have them sit down. And they didn't understand. And it made no sense to them. But they obeyed. And that's hard sometimes, isn't it? To obey when we don't understand. But that's what we need to do. When God tells us to do something, we need to just say yes. Sometime about this time of year in 2014, pretty sure 2014, God told me it was time for me to lay down Bible studies, something I'd been doing, writing and teaching Bible studies for 13 years to the women in our church. And he said, it's time to give it up. And I'm like, why? No, this can't be right. This can't be God. But he kept coming back with the same message. And it was about the time that I realized that I was arguing with God, that I knew that I needed to obey. And when I told my ladies in January of that year that I was quitting Bible study, I said this. I feel like what God is saying is that he has something for me. I have no idea what it is. But I can't say yes to that until I say no to this. And so I obeyed. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Schrock said, come teach at Cornerstone full-time. Something he had for me is this. And if I would have been insistent that Bible study was such a good thing, and it was a call on my life for a time, but it was preparing me. Listen, I have no Bible degree. I don't have an MDiv if I would like to get one. I don't have a master's in biblical studies. I have those. I have 13 years of diving into God's Word and learning from all those books, learning what I need to know to teach you. And that's what God, that whole 13 years was to prepare me for this. I didn't want to say yes to it. I didn't want to say yes when God said, lay it down. But I did, because he called me to do that. Here's the thing. God is going to, at least one point in your life, and maybe many, tell you to do something that you don't want to do. Say yes. Do it. Mrs. Schrog told my seniors recently, and she told me a long time ago, about when the first time she was going to meet face to face with Trevor Otto, who's the head of the school in Milwaukee. Yeah, Victoria's dad. And she was in prayer the week before about that and what was going to happen. And she really didn't know what was going to happen. And so she went before the Lord and said, Lord, what am I to say to him? And God said, whatever he asks you, just say yes. And she was like, I don't know what he's going to ask me. So she kept praying. Give me a minute. She kept praying and kept coming back with the same thing. And when they met, he said, shh, I want you to start a school. That was hard. She knew she had to say yes. And she did. She said yes. Look at the blessings that have followed and will continue to follow for generations. Because Mrs. Shaw said yes. When he calls you,